I turned the key in the ignition and heard the engine hum to life. But before I could shift into gear, something moved beneath the car. I froze. It wasn't small, like a squirrel or a raccoon. It was heavier, more deliberate. I stepped out slowly, keeping the door ajar behind me, my heart beginning to pound with a strange mix of fear and curiosity. Crouching near the front tire, I peered underneath. For pairs of golden eyes stared back. 3 lynx cubs, barely larger than house cats, were curled up tightly against the belly of their mother. The mother lynx lay still, pressed flat against the dirt, her eyes wide open and alert, locked directly on me. I stumbled back a step. What the hell? My truck was parked in my own yard, just outside the tree line. I lived alone, a bit off the beaten path, sure, but I wasn't deep in the wilderness. I never expected anything like this. I made a noise, a short whistle, not loud, but sharp. None of them flinched. "Shoo," I said, waving my hand. Nothing, not even a twitch from the mother. The cubs stayed pressed into her side, nestled against her belly like they had no intention of leaving. Their fur was spotted, ears tipped with black, little tails flicking slightly. I stepped to the other side of the truck and clapped once. Louder. Still no reaction. I could feel the hairs rising on my arms. Not from fear, exactly, but from something else. The scene was wrong. They weren't scared of me, but they also weren't comfortable. It was like they had shut down, frozen in place. I backed off and went inside. From the window, I could still see them. They didn't move. An hour passed. 2. It started getting dark. I kept the porch light off. I didn't want to disturb them further. By 10 o'clock, they were still there. I thought of calling someone. Animal control, the Forest Service, hell, even the sheriff. But what would they do? Trap them? Relocate them? Kill them? No, not yet. I made a sandwich, took a flashlight, and walked slowly back outside. I crouched by the truck again, shining the beams softly under the chassis. The cubs had shifted slightly. One had its paw over the other, eyes half-lidded with exhaustion. The mother looked like she hadn't moved at all. Her eyes were still on me, but she wasn't growling, wasn't baring teeth, just watching. It didn't make sense. I whispered, barely loud enough to hear myself. "Why are you here?" The silence swallowed my question. I set the flashlight down on the grass, beam angled upward so it didn't blind them. Then I did something I still don't fully understand. I sat cross-legged in the dirt, a few feet from the truck, and just waited. Minutes passed. Then an hour. A breeze picked up, and I could hear the trees rustling on the hill behind my house. A coyote howled, distant. And still, the lynxes stayed put. At some point, I must have dozed off, because I remember jolting awake when I heard the soft sound of movement. It was one of the cubs. It had crawled a few inches out from under the truck, sniffing the air. It locked eyes with me, tiny nose twitching. Then, slowly, it backed up again and pressed itself into its mother's side. She didn't even glance at it. She was still looking at me. It wasn't until much later, maybe near dawn, that I noticed something else. The mother lynx, her side, just behind her front leg, was matted with something dark. Blood. It looked dry, not fresh, but definitely blood. And her back right paw, it was twisted at an odd angle. She was injured. And suddenly, everything made more sense. She wasn't just camping out. She couldn't move. And the cubs weren't hiding. They were staying with her, protecting her, or maybe waiting for her to recover. I sat there until the sky began to lighten. A pale gray crept across the yard, and the birds started to sing. The cubs shifted restlessly, one climbing briefly over its mother's back before curling up again. I got up slowly, my knees stiff, and walked back to the house. They watched me the whole time. I didn't know what I was going to do next, but I knew one thing for sure. They weren't going anywhere. Not without her. The next morning, I brought out a bowl of water and a few pieces of raw chicken I had in the fridge. I placed them a few feet away from the truck, just within their view, and then backed off to the porch. I sat there, coffee in hand, watching. Nothing happened for a while. The cubs poked their heads out once or twice, but none of them approached the food. The mother didn't move at all. I could barely see her from where I was, but I knew she hadn't gone anywhere. By afternoon, the water was gone, and one piece of chicken had disappeared. I didn't see who took it. Probably one of the cubs. By the second night, I was starting to feel responsible. I placed more food, this time closer to the tree line. I wasn't sure if that would encourage them to move, but I needed to try something. I didn't sleep much. I kept peeking through the blinds like a man expecting trouble. And maybe I was. Because on the third day, my neighbor Doug showed up. He stood at the edge of my yard with a scowl, arms crossed. You know you've got a damn wildcat under your truck, right? I stepped outside, sighing. Yeah, Doug. I know. You gonna call someone, or what? What if she snaps and goes after someone's dog? Or a kid? There aren't any kids around here. And she's injured. She's not moving. That's even worse. She's cornered. She could lash out. I didn't answer. Doug shook his head. Look, man. I'm just saying, this isn't a petting zoo. You need to deal with it. When he left, I felt the weight settle harder on my shoulders. He wasn't wrong, but he wasn't entirely right either. That afternoon, I watched the cubs again. They were starting to get more active. One of them darted out to swat a leaf blowing across the yard. Another climbed briefly onto the porch steps before freezing, looking up at me, then backing away. I noticed something else too, the way they moved. Familiar. There was a smoothness to their motion, a confidence. They weren't scared of this place. Not in the way wild animals usually are. It hit me all at once. I'd seen them before, or at least their mother. About a year ago, I'd found a half-grown lynx caught in some old fencing back in the woods near my property. I'd cut her loose, left food nearby for a few days, then let her disappear. She had a scar on her front leg that looked just like the one this female had now. Could it be the same one? I didn't want to believe in coincidences. Not like this. But it felt right. Like maybe she remembered. Maybe that's why she came back. Why she chose here. That night, I sat outside again. The cubs were asleep, curled up against her, breathing slow. She was still awake, still watching me. On the fourth morning, I saw her move for the first time. It wasn't much, just a shift of her front legs, trying to get more comfortable. But her back leg dragged slightly behind her, and when she repositioned, she winced. She was definitely hurt. Maybe fractured, maybe worse. But she wasn't aggressive. She wasn't snarling or baring teeth. She was just holding on. That same morning, I heard the phone ring. My sister. I saw your post. About the lynxes. Are you serious? Yeah. I haven't called anyone yet. I'm not sure what to do. You can't keep them there forever. You know that, right? I'm not trying to keep them. They're just staying. You could get in trouble. If someone reports it. I know. She sighed. Just be careful. I didn't post again after that. I didn't want more attention. That night, the wind picked up and the temperature dropped. I brought out an old blanket, cut it into strips, and laid it near the truck like a makeshift nest. I didn't know if they'd use it. I just couldn't sit and do nothing. The next morning, one of the strips was pulled under the vehicle. They were using it. 3 nights passed like that. Quiet. Still. I fed them, watched them, and sat with them. The mother never moved far. The cubs began to play more, sometimes even wrestling in the open grass. But she stayed under the truck. She was the anchor, and they refused to leave her. So I didn't leave either. It happened just after sunrise. I was out early, setting down a bowl of water and fresh meat scraps near the porch, like I'd done the past few mornings. I turned to head back inside when something caught my eye. One of the cubs wasn't moving. The other 2 were tumbling in the grass nearby, swatting at each other's tails. But this one, he was lying half-curled on his side, breathing shallowly. His eyes were open, but glassy. I froze. I wasn't supposed to interfere. That was the rule I'd given myself. But that rule was gone in an instant. I stepped closer, slow and careful. The mother lifted her head, ears flat. She didn't growl, but the warning was in her eyes. I crouched anyway, whispering softly, I just want to help. The closer I got, the more I saw it. His front paw was tucked awkwardly under his chest, and there was something metallic glinting near it, barely visible in the early light. A piece of jagged metal. Maybe scrap. Maybe something buried in the dirt they'd been playing in. It was lodged deep in the soft pad of his foot. The mother rose halfway, tense. I reached slowly toward the cub. My hands were shaking. He whimpered. A high, thin sound that nearly broke me. I scooped him up, and that's when she lunged. She didn't bite, didn't slash, but she leapt forward with a soundless fury, stopping just short of my chest, body trembling. I didn't move. I just stood there, clutching her injured baby. Our eyes locked, and for a moment, I truly thought she was going to tear me apart. But then, she backed off. She lay down again, her whole body shaking, eyes on me the entire time. I didn't wait. I ran to the truck, clutching the cub against my chest like he was made of glass. I wrapped him in a towel and laid him on the passenger seat. He didn't fight it, just lay there, limp and barely conscious. I drove like a madman. The nearest vet who dealt with wildlife was over 30 minutes away. I called ahead, told them I was coming. They said they'd be ready. When I burst through the door, the assistant took one look and disappeared into the back. A minute later, Dr. Ellen came out. She'd helped me before, years ago, when I found an injured owl tangled in barbed wire. She was calm, sharp-eyed, and didn't waste words. "Room 3, she said, already lifting the towel gently. I followed her inside and waited while she examined the cub. He barely made a sound, just stared at the ceiling with dull, watery eyes. She found the metal shard quickly and cleaned the wound, muttering under her breath. "He's lucky. Missed the tendons. We'll flush it and stitch him." I nodded, numb. She paused, then looked up. "Where did you say you found him again?" I hesitated. "Under my truck. With his siblings. And the mother. They've been staying there." She raised an eyebrow. "You mean to tell me you've got a whole lynx family camped under your car?" "Yeah, for days. The mother's injured too. She's not moving much." Dr. Ellen studied me for a long moment. "You didn't bring in just any cub," she said finally. "What do you mean?" She turned and opened a drawer, pulling out a file. Flipped through some pages, then stopped. "We've been tracking a female lynx for the past year. Wildlife cameras picked her up a dozen times. Her tag ID is scarred over now, but the pattern on her ear, her gait, they match the one you're describing." She tapped the file. "She's special. Raised 2 litters already. Avoided every trap and camera like she had a sixth sense. One of the smartest lynx we've seen. And you're telling me she's on your property?" I nodded slowly. She exhaled. "You have any idea what kind of attention this will draw if people find out? That's why I haven't told anyone else. Just you." She stared at the cub, then back at me. "You'll have to bring him back once he wakes up. He won't survive in captivity. They bond tightly. If you separate them too long, it could break him." I swallowed hard. "I'll take him back tonight. I'll sedate him lightly. You'll need to keep him warm, calm. And you better hope she lets you close again." Back in the truck, I sat with the cub curled up in my lap, swaddled in clean gauze, and a baby blanket Ellen had pressed into my hands. The whole way home, I kept thinking about her words. This wasn't just any family. This was her territory, her choice, and I'd stepped into something far bigger than I understood. By the time I pulled into the driveway, the sky was starting to turn that soft blue before full sunrise. The cub was still asleep, his breathing steadier now, body warm against my chest. I turned off the engine and sat for a moment. My heart was pounding again, but not from the drive this time. I wasn't sure what would happen next. Would the mother attack? Would she have left with the other cubs, thinking I stole her baby? I stepped out slowly, holding him close. Everything was still. The early morning silence was heavier than usual. No birds yet. No rustling leaves. Just that expectant hush, like nature itself was holding its breath. And then, I saw her. She was exactly where I'd left her. Under the truck. The 2 remaining cubs were curled against her side, eyes open, watching me. She lifted her head as I approached. Her ears twitched. Her gaze snapped to the bundle in my arms. I stopped a few yards away. I crouched, unwrapped the cub gently, and set him down on the grass. His eyes fluttered open. He looked around, confused, then gave a soft cry. The response was instant. The mother pushed herself forward, limping heavily. The other cubs rose with her. She crossed the distance between us in a few strides that looked painful as hell, but she didn't care. She reached her baby, nuzzled him, sniffed him all over. He weakly batted at her nose. Then, she turned to me. We locked eyes again, and for the first time, she didn't look at me with fear. It was something else, something quieter. I backed away slowly and sat down on the porch steps, giving them space. Within minutes, the 4 of them were huddled together again under the truck. But this time, the injured cub was in the center, safe. I didn't move for a long while. Later that afternoon, I drove into town for supplies. More chicken, extra water bowls, some basic first aid gear. I wasn't planning to intervene more than I had to, but I wanted to be ready. While I waited in line at the small hardware store, I overheard a conversation near the register. "You hear about the logging site?" one man said. "Shut down for now. Too many complaints. Wildlife moving closer to the edge." "No surprise," the clerk replied. "They've been pushing up the ridge for months. No wonder we're seeing more animals near the roads." My stomach sank. It made sense now. Why she showed up. Why she hadn't gone deeper into the woods. She couldn't. They'd pushed her out. Back home, I checked on them again. She lifted her head when I stepped outside, but didn't move. The cubs were sleeping. Even the injured one looked peaceful. I sat a little closer this time. Not too close. Just enough. That night, I sent Dr. Ellen a short message. He's back with her. Doing better. She responded an hour later. Good. Let me know if anything changes. And keep quiet. News like this spreads fast. I took her advice. Over the next few days, the mother seemed to ease into a rhythm. She still limped badly, but she began dragging herself out from under the truck to stretch in the early mornings. The cubs played in the dirt, climbed onto the porch, chased each other in the grass. I set up a motion camera just in case, something low profile. I didn't want to disturb them more than I already had, but I wanted to capture something. Proof, maybe, or a memory for when they were gone. And then, one evening, as I sat on the porch watching the sun set behind the ridge, something dawned on me. Out of every yard they could have chosen, every cabin, every clearing, why mine? Was it random? Or had she remembered? I thought back to that day a year ago, the young lynx tangled in fencing. I'd cut her loose, stayed nearby for hours. I'd never tried to trap her or call anyone. I just helped. Could she have known? I'll never get an answer to that. But the thought settled into me like a stone in a riverbed. Some things aren't just chance. And whether it was instinct, memory, or something else entirely, she'd come back here. To this place. To me. It was the 8th morning since they arrived. The weather had turned warmer, the air buzzing with insects and pollen. Life felt like it had returned to normal for everyone else, but not for me. Something had shifted inside me since that first moment under the truck. I couldn't stop thinking about them, even in the quietest parts of the day. The cubs were thriving. I could tell. Their steps were stronger, their games more reckless. Even the one with the injured paw was getting bolder, hopping with 3 legs, refusing to be left out. The mother, she was still favoring her back leg, but she moved with more ease now. Each day, she stretched farther from the truck. Each day, she looked a little less like a ghost and a little more like herself. But I knew what was coming. They couldn't stay forever, and I wasn't sure I wanted them to. That felt like a betrayal to admit, even silently, but it was the truth. They were wild. This place, my porch, my yard, my broken-down truck, it wasn't home. Not for them. That afternoon, I found myself sitting by the edge of the clearing where the trees began again. I traced the bark of an old pine with my fingers and thought back to the day everything had changed. It had been last fall. I was walking back from the mailbox along the lower trail when I saw her, caught in the corner of an old wire fence, bleeding from a gash across her side. She was smaller then, younger, wild-eyed. A lynx, alone, terrified. I remembered kneeling slowly, talking in a soft voice, using my coat to block her view while I cut the wires. She didn't fight much. She was already too weak. I stayed with her for hours, left food and water nearby. The next day, she was gone. For months, I wondered if she'd made it. I told myself she had, but deep down, I figured she didn't. Now I knew the truth. She had, and she came back. With cubs. With trust. Not because she wanted a handout. Not because she needed scraps. Because she remembered. That evening, just before sunset, I watched her from the porch. She stood out in the open, more confident than I'd ever seen her. The cubs raced around her feet. Then, slowly, she lifted her gaze to me. And I knew. This was goodbye. She turned toward the trees, called softly, and the cubs fell in line behind her. The injured one limped slightly, but kept up. I stood without realizing it. I walked to the edge of the yard as they paused beneath the tree-line. The mother glanced back once, eyes catching mine. She didn't need to say anything. I felt it. Thank you. And then she disappeared into the woods, quiet and graceful. I stood there for a long time, long after the shadows swallowed them. Something about that silence felt sacred, like the end of a chapter one hadn't realized I was living in. I don't cry easily, but that night I did. Not because I was sad, because I'd been given something I didn't deserve. She trusted me, enough to come back, enough to let me help, enough to leave one of her babies in my hands and believe I'd bring him back. It's been weeks now. The truck still sits in the same place. I haven't moved it. Part of me can't. Sometimes, when I walk to the woods in the early morning, I think I hear something, a distant paw crunching on dry leaves, a chirp that's not quite a bird. I look, but I never see them, and I don't need to. I know they're out there, and I hope, wherever they are, they remember. Because I do. Every day,